And she doesn't quite come out and apologize to the Spectre, but she says she regrets that they had a difficult relationship during this lifetime, and she's here to pay her respects as well. Nicodemus Hazard shows up to pay respect. The Patriot, the new hero who was born near the end of the Haunting of America storyline, shows up. The four surviving members of the JSA, Jay Garrick, Alan Scott, Ted Grant, and Ted Knight, show up. And it's Jay who approaches the Spectre with a big Jay Garrick smile on his face and says, "Hey, look, Spec. Alan thought that this was so important an occasion that he decided to put on his old Green Lantern costume to pay respect." And that's nice because, of course, at the time, Alan was de-aged and he was wearing the all red and green Sentinel costume. And it's nice that it's Jay who's the one who speaks to the Spectre on behalf of the JSA. It appears that any animosity, any resentment that Jay holds towards Jim is gone. And they are friends once again as Jim faces his final moments. Mr. Terrific, Michael Holt, is also there, still wearing that makeshift cobbled together costume, and Ostrander throws a great bone to James Robinson, David S. Squire, and Jeff Johns, and that Wildcat approaches Mr. Terrific and says, "So, new Mr. Terrific, huh?" And Michael, for his part, crosses his arms and says, "Yes, you got a problem with that?" And Wildcat smiles and says, No, just do right by the name. An old buddy of mine used to go by that name." So really nice because, of course, during the first arc of JSA, when Michael Holt shows up in his more iconic Mr. Terrific costume, he's introducing himself to the new members of the JSA, but reintroducing himself to the elder statesman. Superman and Batman also show up, and this is the one unfortunate part which dates this issue, because here we see Batman wearing his Tim Burton, Michael Keaton inspired all black costume. Superman at this time was in his electric blue form. And both men deliver the same message, although in, I'd say, a slightly different tone, using different words, but it's all to the same effect that both were concerned with the amount of power Jim Corrigan had, and they were also concerned with the way in which he wielded that power. But in the end, they're both here to pay tribute to a man who spent almost 60 years fighting in the name of justice, and they both have immense respect for Jim Corrigan. And in the background, we see other members of the DCU hero community showing up to pay their respects. So now the Spectre says, "Very well, Father, please proceed." And Father Kramer delivers a very short service, upon which the Spectre pulls back the hood, and we see the face of Jim Corrigan. And Jim casts off the Spectre. And Jim is there standing in the nude, and we see the Spectre force, now in the form of a green cloak, going up towards the light, presumably to meet with God or the voice and to be assigned to a new host. And Jim looks up and says farewell to the Spectre. And the Spectre, what I would say is the ultimate sign of respect to the host, says farewell to Jim before departing. And there's a pause as Jim is standing there wondering what's going to come next. And then a ray of light opens, and Jim is absorbed by the light, and he rises up to the heavens. And that's it. Jim Corrigan is gone, and one can hope that the Archangel Michael was right and that he has been accepted into heaven. And so, one by one, all of those in attendance leave the cemetery until finally it's just Father Kramer and the Phantom Stranger. Oh, before that, I do want to mention something really sweet between Nate and Alex. They both expressed their love for each other. So we can presume that they're going to have a happy ending together. One would hope that they get married or they decide to live together for the rest of their lives. To the best of my knowledge, Nate Kane and Alex Williams have never appeared anywhere else outside of this run. And on one hand, that's a shame because they're both really likable characters, but at the same time, I kind of like that they're two of the proverbial toys that have been put back in the toy box. While it would be nice to see them again, at the same time, we don't have to worry about some tragic fate befalling them. It's just nice to think that they get their happy ending. So now it's Father Kramer and Nate Kane together at the tombstone. And Phantom Stranger can tell that Father Kramer is somewhat ill at ease, and he asks Father Kramer, "What's the matter?" And Father Kramer says, "Well, after all that I've experienced with Jim, I'm still left wondering so many things about the faith, and I'm hoping that Jim got what he wants, but I just don't know. I just don't have all of the answers. But I guess in the end, that's what has to happen." And Phantom Stranger says, "Yes, I agree. A faith that has answers to all of the questions is not a faith worth holding on to." And Father Kramer concurs, and he says, "Still, thinking about Jim Corrigan, I do hope he gets what he wanted. And now that I think about it, I don't think that Jim Corrigan was a nice man. I don't think he was a kind man, but he was a good man." And Phantom Stranger again agrees with Father Kramer and says, "Yes, and let us hope that for all of our sakes, the next host of the Spectre is just as good a man as Jim Corrigan was." So it's kind of nice because in their first interaction, Father Kramer and Nate Kane didn't hit it off well. And here it's nice to see that the two of them go their separate ways on friendlier terms. And I don't think Father Kramer has been seen since this final issue of the Spectre. I'd kind of like to imagine that he was the priest who was conducting a service in one of the scenes that was added to the trade collection of Infinite Crisis, where the doors to the place of worship were open to everybody, civilian and costume superhero, during the crisis. It would be nice to think that it was Father Kramer who organized that. But then we get this really neat last couple of pages in which we get a close-up on the tombstone, which beforehand was completely blank, and we see some force etching the words "Jim Corrigan, servant of God" into the headstone. And then on the final page, you got this beautiful splash where we see that the sun is shining. Jim Corrigan's tombstone is in the center of the splash page, and we get the words "The End." What a beautiful ending to this run. So rarely do we get runs in comics where there is a perfect beginning, middle, and end. And the story is brought to an end for purely storytelling reasons. Certainly over the last few years, we've had a number of series that have been canceled, but it's been due to sales. It's been due to the desire to have a new number one in order to make a quick cash grab. And here, there was nothing behind the ending of this series. Jim Corrigan had reached the end of his journey. It was time for him to get his eternal reward. And I can't think of a better creative team to have on this book than Ostrander and Mandrake. Of course, Jim Corrigan would appear in the Day of Judgment miniseries, which would introduce the next host of the Spectre. That host, of course, being Hal Jordan. And then we would see a Jim Corrigan appear at the time of Infinite Crisis. But as I'll argue during my spotlight on the Crispus Allen Spectre, this to me was not the original Jim Corrigan reborn. This was an entirely new character who happened to share the name Jim Corrigan and looked like the original Jim Corrigan. One even has to wonder whether the new 52 Jim Corrigan is the pre-Flashpoint Jim Corrigan resurrected, or whether this is just a copy of Jim Corrigan who we saw running around the new 52 DCU. Gotta wonder whether we're going to see the original Jim Corrigan in this post-rebirth era of DC Comics. But I love the Spectre. My goodness, folks. This episode in itself has been a labor of love. I'm sad to see it come to an end. But I'm still looking forward to talking about the Spectre during the Hal Jordan years and the Crispus Allen era. Because certainly those were really interesting times in DCU history. So I'm going to get to talk about some really neat stuff like Day of Judgment, Infinite Crisis, Day of Vengeance, Infinite Crisis, Final Crisis, Brightest Day. So lots of great Spectre stuff coming your way. But I think it's time to take a break from this Spotlight series. As I've done with other Spotlight series in the past, I know that this particular episode started in December, and by my calculations, it's in March that you're listening to this. And we've got episode 125, another milestone episode. And episode 125 is one of those great episodes in which it's inspired by some listener feedback from Jason Jaroslawski. And Jason, my apologies if I've butchered the pronunciation of your last name. A while back, Jason sent a great email with a list of suggestions for future episodes, and one of his suggestions was a look at the Batman Wildcat team-up stories, and that I am planning on doing for episode 126. But as a primer for episode 126, episode number 125 is going to be a look at the very interesting history of Earth B, and that is going to come your way in 2 weeks. So until then, if you want to leave me some feedback on this mammoth episode 124, you can do so in one or two ways. You can email me at comicsandhistory@gmail.com, or you can go on over to Facebook, like the Comics and History Facebook page, get updates on upcoming show releases, leave some feedback there. Always look forward to listening or hearing back from you, my friends and loyal listeners. Until another 14 days have coming on, this class is dismissed.